This is 21-year-old Howard Ashleman, a devout Christian and prominent student at the Hobe Sound Bible College in Martin County, Florida. Despite only recently moving to Hobe Sound, Howard immediately had a positive impact on those around him. As an active member of the college choir, he quickly caught the attention of Hannah Jones, and the two developed a romantic relationship. Hannah's parents fully supported this and embraced Howard as part of the family. Essentially, there was nothing but positive things to say about Howard. However, his seemingly perfect life was about to face intense scrutiny. In August of 2016, the Martin County Sheriff's Office received a tip from a private investigator in Fayetteville, North Carolina, over 650 miles away from Hobe Sound. Apparently, Howard Ashleman was a prime suspect in an ongoing investigation. A few hours after receiving this tip, Martin County detectives asked Howard's girlfriend Hannah and her parents if they could speak to them about Howard.
How long have you known Howard?
Since
Late August.
what have you been told by anybody?
He mainly sold drugs and he was in some gangs.
As more information was revealed about the type of person Howard was, Hannah's parents became concerned for their daughter's safety.
We obviously don't feel comfortable with her hanging out with Howard. I don't know when he might snap or change who he is as a person, and she be right in the middle of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that concerns me as a dad.
Little did they know, Howard was involved in a crime much more sinister than drug dealing.
I've tried to erase it out of my mind because it was traumatic for me.
2 years earlier, on August 24th, 2014, a man named Pete Chambers reported his 28-year-old son James missing to the Fayetteville Police Department in North Carolina. On August 14th, 10 days earlier, James needed a drive home from his full-time job as a construction worker before he headed to his part-time job as a lifeguard at Lake Lehman, about an hour and a half away. Pete, who was also James's boss, was initially supposed to drive him home, but he ended up asking one of James' co-workers if he could drive him home instead. The co-worker agreed. The next day, Friday, August 15th, James texted his mom saying that he loved her and would see her soon, but was unresponsive the rest of the weekend. This was uncharacteristic of James, and his family and friends quickly became concerned. After exhausting all efforts to reach him, they contacted the Lake Lehman campsite and discovered that James never even showed up. They crossed their fingers that they were overthinking it and he would show up for work on Monday, but he never did. On Tuesday, Pete asked the coworker who drove James home if he knew where James might be. But the only information he could provide was that he dropped James off and hadn't heard from him since. The day after this conversation, that coworker stopped showing up to work. 10 days after James was last seen, his family decided it was time to get both the police and the media involved.
Call some damn buddy. Please.
James Chambers is desperate. He can't find his 28-year-old son.
Nobody's heard from him. Nobody's seen him.
A missing persons investigation was immediately launched. While interviewing James's father, they asked the obvious question: who was the coworker that drove James home? It was revealed to be none other than Howard Ashleman. Howard was actually hired and mentored by Pete, who had described him as a polite and respectful employee. However, there was one occasion a few months prior where Howard and Pete's son James got into a very heated altercation. Apparently, Howard even threatened to kill James. Naturally, Howard was asked to come in for an interview.
Did you guys ever hang out after work?
Yes, ma'am.
How was that?
Not bad.
He was questioned about his whereabouts and actions on the day James disappeared.
You guys left work. Tell me what happened.
But we went and I stopped at the ABC store.
Mm-hmm. How was work that day? Was everything good?
Everything was great.
Howard claimed that after work, they stopped by a nearby liquor store to purchase some alcohol. This was later confirmed by the parking lot surveillance footage. They then headed back to James's house where they had some drinks before Howard went on his way.
When I left him, I went straight home.
Mm-hmm.
Then the neighbors were having barbecue across the street, so I stopped in there.
Who was all at the barbecue?
The people who live there.
Just them?
Some friends.
Howard said he left the barbecue before it got dark and went home. The detective then asked if they could search Howard's truck, but he no longer had it.
What happened to the vehicle?
My vehicle?
Mm-hmm.
I sold it already.
What was wrong with your truck?
I blew it up.
Howard told the detectives that he had scrapped the pickup after he blew the engine from doing donuts in a parking lot. Surveillance footage from the salvage yard confirmed that Howard disposed of the truck 5 days after James disappeared. On the same day, Pete asked him about James. The rest of the interview didn't provide any more significant information, but investigators had a strong feeling that foul play was involved. So, the case was handed over to the Homicide Division. A deep dive into Howard's social media revealed that Howard had 12 different accounts, each presenting a different persona and different names, the most alarming being Homicide Howie. Since James's disappearance, Howard had been sharing disturbing thoughts and content about things like cannibalism and mutilation of a body. Detectives decided to look into Howard's cell phone records, and during the time that he said he was at the neighborhood barbecue, his cell phone location was at Murphy Road. Howard was then brought into the station for another interview and confronted with this evidence.
When you left James' house, where did you go?
Home.
Where were you at for the whole evening?
I was at the house and my friends across the street.
Your cell phone was pinging at this place for almost 2 hours. Okay? So that means you're within this 3-mile radius. That means you're not at home.
I think I can explain it.
Okay, well, explain it to me.
Reno's house is in here somewhere.
Okay?
And he had my phone on him when he went back home.
Howard claimed that his friend Reno Parks had tagged along to the barbecue, and when they parted ways, Reno accidentally took Howard's phone with him. A couple of hours later, Reno brought the phone back and they continued to hang out. The detective was convinced Howard wasn't telling the full truth.
Howard, this is your out. I brought you in right now to tell me the truth. You have not told me that truth since you walked in that door.
Yes, sir.
No, you have not. That's the only thing I want for you today, Howard. It's the truth.
I'm sorry. I mean, some of this stuff, it's not like it happened yesterday.
After yet another fruitless interview, investigators decided to look into Howard's friend Reno. They discovered that Reno had an extensive criminal background and was currently out on parole. But when they tracked him down, he declined to speak with the detectives. With no concrete evidence connecting Howard to James's disappearance, no more persons of interest to talk to, and no sign of James's body, the case stagnated for months.
Missing for more than 2 months. His family calls his disappearance a mystery.
I know I'm looking for my son's body because I know James wouldn't do this. And to know he's out there like a piece of trash. And to go to bed at night thinking that the worst thoughts of what could have happened to my son, what somebody has done to my son.
Clearly desperate for answers, James's family turned to social media, posting on Facebook to ask for help, gaining nationwide attention. This resulted in a nonprofit for missing children called the Polyclass Foundation, helping circulate thousands of missing posters for James. Unfortunately, their efforts continued to come up short. James's parents had already lost their youngest son 6 years earlier, and the idea of losing another son was becoming a painful reality. On August 8, 2015, nearly a year since James's disappearance, Howard once again caught the attention of authorities. But this was unrelated to the James Chambers case. Howard's girlfriend reported him to the police for domestic assault, and charges were placed. However, she did not attend her pretrial hearing, so the case was dismissed. This was a slap in the face for the Chambers family, who believed Howard was dangerous. Frustrated, James's parents reached out to David Marshburn, a well-known private investigator. He agreed to help, and the first step was searching the Benson's family property, a piece of land owned by the elderly couple that Howard lived with. The Bensons agreed to the search, and Marshburn quickly discovered something big. It turns out that when Howard scrapped his pickup truck, he kept several parts, including the windows, radio, and seat belts. Lo and behold, there was blood spatter found on one of the side windows and the radio. Fayetteville police were immediately contacted and dispatched to the Bensons' residence to collect pictures and DNA samples for evidence. However, the results of the blood samples ultimately came back as inconclusive. The DNA sample was too small and not sufficient for testing. And just like that, the investigators were now back at square one. Another year passed, and it seemed that this case had gone cold. There had been no new leads in the case, and James's parents were now living 2,300 miles away in Dallas, Texas. Howard had even deleted the disturbing posts from his many Facebook accounts and seemed to be on an indefinite hiatus from social media. Regardless, James's mom had still been thoroughly monitoring Howard's online activity, Then, one day in the late summer of 2016, he reappeared on Facebook, but this time his location was marked as Hobe Sound, Florida. Through further digging, James's mom learned of Howard's enrollment at Hobe Sound Bible College, his new gig as part of the choir, and his new girlfriend, Hannah. His mom quickly contacted private investigator David Marshburn, who contacted the Martin County Sheriff's Office in Florida. Once Martin County was caught up to speed, they wondered what Howard's motive or endgame could be. They then reached out to Hannah and her parents, bringing us right back to this interview.
How long have you known Howard? Since late August.
What have you been told by anybody?
That he shot a guy. He killed him. He didn't care a lot about what people thought. If they didn't do what he wanted, they'd just shoot him.
So you talked about shooting people before?
Soon after this interview, Howard was asked to come into the station for an interview of his own. Right off the bat, Howard pulled back when the detective tried to dive into his past.
I don't want to go through that.
Well, I understand, but we need to try to...
I've tried to erase it out of my mind because it was traumatic for me. Right after that, I started using drugs real heavy. And I kind of fried my brain.
Okay. But I'm sure you still remember.
I remember a little bit and stuff.
The detective made his stance clear, that he believed James was dead and that Howard knew what had happened. Their next move was to try and convince Howard to confess by appealing to his newfound faith.
You have made a decision to be a different person, to be a good Christian, to be a leader of the Christian faith.
Unfortunately, nothing was working.
I'm about to get up and walk out.
This interrogation essentially ended there, but after leaving the station, Howard met with Hannah and she decided to confront him about the allegations herself. As they spoke, Howard was unaware that Hannah was secretly recording their entire conversation with her phone.
Who got killed? Whether it was you or not, who got killed?
Babe.
Did you do something? What? Tell him.
I can't.
Did you kill the person? Tell me.
I don't have to.
No, you don't have to.
You sure you know?
You didn't. You told me you didn't. You did?
Although Howard never verbally admitted to killing someone, Hannah claims that he nodded his head yes. But before this recording could even be submitted to the police, Martin County received even bigger news when Howard called them saying he was ready to confess. They set up a meeting between Howard, Hannah, her parents, and one of the detectives at a nearby Walgreens.
I'm definitely going to do the right thing. I'm not trying to run or nothing, you know.
Okay, I can believe you.
Right after saying this, Howard was advised by Hannah's parents not to speak without legal representation. When the lawyer arrived, he advised Howard to hold off on talking until they discussed this decision. Everybody parted ways, but Howard's troubles were far from over. After his college was informed of the allegations, his enrollment was terminated. College president Daniel Stetler released a video statement addressing the community about the recent developments.
When he shared the incident with us, we realized it was very serious, and we told him that he could no longer continue as a student at Hobe Sound Bible College. We urged him to go back to North Carolina and make confession to the proper authorities.
Soon after this statement went public, Fayetteville prosecutors decided to offer a plea deal to Howard, aiming for a 15 to 20-year sentence for second-degree murder. Howard agreed. He drove all the way from Hobe Sound to Fayetteville on the day of his hearing. But once he got there, he got cold feet and went back to Hobe Sound. The same thing happened a year later, in December of 2017, when prosecutors gave him an ultimatum. Come back to Fayetteville and confess, or they would proceed with a trial. Howard complied, once again returning to Fayetteville, but once again disappearing. This time, he didn't head back to Hobe Sound. His whereabouts were unknown. Even the public defenders representing him had no idea where he was. They contacted the Violent Criminal Apprehension Team, and within 48 hours, Howard was located and arrested near the tiny town of Randleman in North Carolina. Investigators learned that 2 days before Howard was found, he and Hannah, who is now 18 years old, had driven to Johnson County to tie the knot at a local courthouse. Now that they were married, Hannah had spousal privilege, meaning she would not have to testify against Howard during the trial. But this ultimately didn't matter, because after being taken into custody, Howard officially accepted the plea deal. The plea deal required a full confession, so they brought him into the interrogation room for a final interview.
I don't know why I did what I did.
According to Howard, on the day James was killed, they left work and stopped at a liquor store, and then went to James's house. They then decided to hang out at the Bensons, but on the way, James said he wanted to go see someone who owed him money that he would beat up if he didn't pay. Howard didn't want to get involved, so he refused, and a heated argument ensued. So Howard pulled over, went to the back of his truck, and grabbed a rifle.
I just wanted to scare him and tell him to back off, basically. And I didn't even look through the scope or nothing. I just raised up and squeezed the trigger off. It wasn't my intention to hurt him. I just wanted to, in my mind, I was like in the movies, how they shoot right by someone and scare him. And then I was going to tell him if you don't stop, the next one's going to get you. And I was waiting for him to come out yelling at me and say, you just try to kill me. But nothing happened. You know, then I realized I was in trouble. I put my hand up there and there was no pulse or nothing, and he wasn't breathing.
Howard then confessed that he and Reno buried James's body in the woods behind the Bensons' property.
What happens after you ran to the woods?
I think I went and cleaned up a little bit and changed my clothes. And I went across the street to some of my friends over there. They have more liquor, and I just started drinking more. Because my mind was so messed up. 2 weeks later, realizing the police were on his trail, Howard decided to dig up and dismember the body and separate it into 3 trash bags. I wanted it to be able to be easier to handle.
Where did y'all dispose of the body at?
On a bridge.
Was it a creek? Was it a river?
It was a bigger creek.
It was broad daylight when you dumped the body over the bridge.
Well, more towards the evening, but still light outside.
The detectives would later realize that Howard had been dropping hints about what had happened through his Facebook posts. In one instance, through one of his aliases, Howard posted, "I had a very strange dream about you last night. I wonder if it's because I burned all your things." And another post around the same time said, "I never knew much about people until I took one apart, just to see how it worked." The police finally had a confession, but there was one more thing that he owed investigators due to his plea deal. He needed to help them find James. They first went to the Bensons' property to search for evidence of the burial, but unfortunately nothing notable was found. They began looking for the bridge where he disposed of James's body. The search for James's body wasn't as straightforward as investigators had hoped. It had been almost 4 years since James's murder, and Howard couldn't recall which bridge he had dumped the body. So they decided to ask Howard's friend and accomplice, Reno Parks. He refused to speak with police, but thankfully, he was willing to speak with private investigator David Marshburn.
You remember the bridge you talked about with solid concrete? Was it like that?
No, it was solid.
But there was no metal guardrail.
No, there wasn't anything.
There was only one bridge that fit this description, the Keener Road Bridge. Howard did seem to recognize this bridge, but unfortunately, there was still no trace of James. As authorities continued to search for his body, Howard's sentencing took place. He was sentenced to 16 to 20 years in prison for the second-degree murder of James Chambers.
Relief. My family's finally gonna have some peace.
On February 21st, 2018, Howard's sentence began. He currently resides at the Columbus Correctional Institution in Whiteville, North Carolina. To this day, James's body has not been found.